Hello and welcome to our Topic 2-3 video on Russia. We're going to be discussing political and economic change in Russia, and also the citizens, the society, and the Russian state. Alright, so real quick, we're going to take a quick look at Russian history. Again, Russia has always struggled with gradual change and really had some major difficulties over time with multiple revolutions in the 20th century. This resistance to change in Russia, whether it's the West in technology, democracy, or a failing economy has created instability at different times and has been pretty common throughout Russian history. There are three distinct periods of history in Russia to take into account here. You have your rule of a monarchy, or the monarchist rule with the Tsar. You have the post-1917 communist revolution, and then you also have the post-1991 revolution, which was really the end of the Soviet Union. So let's take a quick look at Tsarist rule. Autocratic leadership, that's something you're going to see that's very common throughout Russian history, from the monarchy with the Tsar all the way through Stalinism, up until we get to the big changes in 1991. And again, if you take that a step farther and you look where Putin is today, you can see that the Russian people do gravitate towards, or the Russian state gravitates towards, authoritarianism. The Tsar was the head of the church at the time in Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church, and there was a intermingling of both political and religious leaders. Isolation from the rest of the West and the changes that were taking place with the Industrial Revolution and the technology is a big issue. You're going to have a few czars that are going to attempt to push Russia into the future. You have both Peter the Great and then Catherine the Great are going to try to push Westernization. But there's always this steady tension between Slavic tradition and Western impulses. All right. The 19th century was a real period of turmoil between the czars and the people of Russia, and you'll always hear this term backwards. You know, Russia's always a step behind or a little backwards in comparison to the way that the rest of Europe was moving forward. All right, that's all going to kind of culminate with the revolution of 1917. You're going to see the end of the Tsarist, the reign of the Tsar. Tsar Nicholas II was very weak, and he was weak for a couple different reasons. The continued pressure over time on the monarchy for change from the people of Russia, which was very agrarian, very poor. You're going to see Russia's loss to the Japanese in the Russo-Japanese War, which was a huge kind of blow to the psyche of the Russian people, this massive nation being defeated by the Japanese. You're going to see some events, some domestic events with some protesters being basically shot and killed by the Tsar and his security forces while peacefully protesting. So that's going to add, going to fan the flames of discontent. World War I is also going to have a huge role. The horrible economic conditions, the losses on the Eastern Front to the Germans. All of these things are going to kind of culminate, come together with the end of the Tsar, and Tsar Nicholas will actually abdicate and leave the throne. There's an attempt to transfer it to his brother, but that also fails. You're also going to have lots of defecting soldiers coming back from the front, and all of these things creates or destabilizes the Russian state. All right, that's what's going to lead to this revolution. Revolution is going to be led by Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Now, there's going to be a couple different factions here fighting for control or power, but Lenin is going to rise to the forefront, and he's going to use a version of Marxism. And basically, he's going to modify Marxism a little bit, talking about democratic centralism. By democratic centralism, he's really talking about an oligarchy, a small group of leaders, the vanguard, the leaders of the revolution, were going to be the ones that are going to organize the people because they can't do it on their own. All right. He believed that Russia would fit, even though in the Marxist vision it was going to be a really industrialized culture or industrialized system. He believed it would work, or the Marxist ideas with communism would work in Russia because the conditions were so poor. All right. The Bolsheviks were the followers of Lenin, and they would gain full control of the country in 1917. Again, things are not going to be great. So in 1918, you're going to see a push by the what's called the White Army. That's going to be elements of the former Russian military. You're also going to have the Allied powers from the West get involved in possibly pushing Lenin and the Bolsheviks out of power, that fear of communism taking over. But eventually the Red Army and Lenin would win, and this would eventually lead to Lenin instituting what's known as the New Economic Policy. What's interesting about the New Economic Policy is the fact that this New Economic Policy embraced some elements of private property and capitalism. So it kind of went against what Lenin had really used as a foundation for his revolution, which was communism. All right. Now Lenin dies in 1924, which created a huge power vacuum and kind of left Russia in a lurch. And it would take a few years for his successor to emerge. And of course, that successor would be Stalin. Stalin would gain control, and he would transform what had been an authoritarian oligarchy into a totalitarian state. All right. He's going to modify Leninism. He's going to put the emphasis back on communism. In particular, he's going to create the Communist Party. He's going to strengthen it. He's going to emphasize it and make it the center of political power in Russia. And in Russia, only about 7% of the population was actually going to be members of the Communist Party. So again, you're talking about the creation of a real kind of elite. A couple of vocabulary words here. Nomenklatura, that's the list. That's the order of merit, or the list of people that were going to be pilfered, or not pilfered, people were going to be picked to fill government roles or government jobs. Again, it was, an order of merit. You wanted to be on the list if you were a party member, because that was going to open the door to greater access and more success. At the pinnacle of the Russian system, you're going to have the Central Committee, which is going to have about 300 party leaders. That's going to be divided down one more time to the Politburo, which was going to be 12 men at the very top, and then at the very pinnacle of the Politburo was going to be the General Secretary. So again, you have this hierarchical structure of, you have your 7% of the population of your party members. You have your Central Committee, who is about 300 members strong, and then at the very top you have your 12-member Politburo, and they're led by the General Secretary. So decision-making in the Soviet Union can be boiled down to the decisions of that General Secretary and the 12 members of the Politburo. With some issues, you could push it down to the 300 party members of the Central Committee, and then you could push it down a little bit farther to the actual Communist Party. But again, you see there that democracy is centralized in the very pinnacle of that political party. All right, so Stalinism, you see there at the title. Stalin had a wonderful plan for the Soviet Union to jump them into the modern age, to westernize, to not so much westernize, but the industrial part. And to do that, he had a two-pronged approach. He was going to collectivize agriculture, which means he was going to bring all of the peasants together and try to organize them and make them more economically sound, more efficient. He was going to eliminate private property. Stalin eliminates private property in the Soviet Union, and he has this idea where the farms are going to feed the cities are going to grow the industrialization. There was a great deal of resistance by the peasants in terms of this new arrangement and having to work together and give up their own private lands and working for the state. So many of them were starved, forcefully moved, or even outright killed, and these were called the purges. And Stalin would kill millions of his own people over the course of his time as a leader of Russia. On the industrial side, he was going to create these very ambitious 5-year plans, and this was going to be industrialization, very rapid, booming industrialization. They're going to do it in a 5-year plan. Big-time goals for production. The production was going to be focused on the creation of big industry, heavy industries, oil and steel and coal, rail. And basically he would create what's known as the Gosplan, which was going to be the Central Planning Commission. Again, when you look at Russia, we can do a comparison between Britain and Russia. Britain was a mixed economy. Russia was a full command economy where the government actually dictated all actions of the economy, not just the commanding heights. All levels were going to be planned out and coordinated by the government. All right, so Stalin's going to die in 1953, again creating a big power vacuum. Anytime you have these charismatic leaders, a lot of the time they don't pick successors. And again, there is generally some turmoil who's going to follow. Nikita Khrushchev, a hero of the Russian military in World War II, is going to take over, and he's going to institute what's known as de-Stalinization. And this is really kind of to eliminate or move away from some of the real negativity that Stalin would bring to Russia, particularly the millions of his own people that he would kill. Khrushchev attempts to open the press a little bit, starts to decentralize some of the economic decision-making, because Gosplan, what they are beginning to figure out even now in the 1950s, it's really something that's way too big for just one commission. The collective farms, they loosened up and restructured some of those collective farms and began to give not so much private property to the peasants, but give them a piece of what they were growing. This is all great, and the people kind of looked at Khrushchev moving them forward, but he was damaged by continued economic downgrades, and also he looked very weak after the Cuban Missile Crisis. All right. He was replaced by Leonid Brezhnev. Now, what you're going to see here is we're going to have a series of Russian leaders who do not have the charisma of Stalin, and that's going to also kind of play into their decline. That's going to basically kind of play all the way up until Mikhail Gorbachev comes to power. And he's a new type of leader, and he's viewed as a reformer. And he was open to Western change because he really could see the writing on the wall that things were not, they weren't going to survive. Again, Britain had seen the writing on the wall in the 1970s, and you had Thatcher bring change. The Chinese see the writing on the wall in the 70s, and Deng Xiaoping is going to bring that change, and again in China's own way. And really, Gorbachev gets into power in the 80s, and it's really kind of too little too late. He's going to put into effect two programs, Glasnost and Perestroika. Glasnost was openness, and again would allow the Russian people to discuss issues. It opened up the press. But the problem was it backfired a little bit because it really vented even more hostility than what Gorbachev had anticipated, and it made it more difficult for him to get his work done. Perestroika was the economic reform, and this was the most, or the largest change that he was going to bring, but it really wasn't successful. Also is going to bring some democratization. He created a new Congress of the People with some elected representatives. And again, tried to bring in some elections, but again, we're talking about too little too late. All right, so this is going to lead us or take us all the way up till 1991. There's going to be a coup d'etat, by conservatives led by the KGB, the vice president, and a bunch of top military advisors are going to try to take Gorbachev out of power because they felt he was leading them down the wrong path, away from the goals of the original revolution. All right, they took him, and he was placed under house arrest at his home. And basically they told everybody he was too sick to lead. Well, the coup is going to fail really because of popular support and protest, and there's going to be led by Boris Yeltsin. He was the elected president of the Russian Republic, and he was going to bring and stage these huge political events to put pressure on the coup to stop and bring Gorbachev back to power. And eventually they were successful. Gorbachev was brought back to power, but really, really weak. And then from that point forward, the Soviet Union would only last a few months. All right, the Russian Federation, the new government in Russia, once the Soviet Union disappears, Yeltsin is going to emerge as the president of the most powerful republic, which was Russia, and that's going to kind of play into him being the leader of this new group. He is going to work to create a Russian-style democracy, which is really going to be a hybrid. He's going to institute shock therapy. Instead of taking smaller steps within the system like Gorbachev attempted to do, Yeltsin was going to blow things up, and he was going to shock the system. The 93 Constitution is going to be put into place, and it's going to be approved by referendum in Russia, and it's going to institute a three-branch government, which is going to be a hybrid of both presidential and parliamentary systems. The problem is that Yeltsin was really not going to be the leader that Russia needed at the time due to a bunch of factors, including some illness and also alcoholism. All right, so moving away from the history, again, the video with Commanding Heights is going to kind of fill in those gaps or bring you up to some of the things that were happening during Yeltsin's government, so make sure that you take a peek at that. The topic 3 deals with cleavages. The largest cleavage in Russia is going to be nationality. Again, 20% of the population is not Russian. The Federation is made up of a ton of autonomous regions, republics, and provinces. We've had 2 major conflicts in Chechnya, and the Caucasus region is the biggest area of concern, and I know you guys are all aware of what was happening in the Ukraine and Crimea, and it's still happening there today. All right, religion, very briefly, the past under the Tsar was Russian Orthodox. The USSR had no religion. Again, religion was competition for the Communist Party. We don't want that. Yeltsin did open the door with the Revolution of '91 to open the door to faith again. So the Russian Orthodox Church exists today, but most Russians are non-religious. There are a small number of other faiths inside Russia, and the Muslim population has been one of the minority groups that has been growing. All right, so social class. Soviet system really helped to eliminate class differences. Egalitarian views were promoted, and the Communist Party really was blind to economic and social class when they were recruiting from within. All right, and this egalitarianism actually was a lot higher in Russia than you'll find other places. All right, Russians who live in the urban areas enjoy a higher standard of living, education, and are more in touch with Western culture. So again, the urban areas, which is 73% of the population, are better off than the rural areas. All right, a couple brief beliefs and attitudes. You'll see those on the slide. Mistrust of government. They have low participation in interest group. And you will see that there is some longing for the old Soviet Union.